Okay, I guess we can start. It's a pleasure to see a lot of uh, members of our network. I mean, WEC and OMEC network joining this call. We have an interesting agenda with several speakers, so I do want not to steal time, and I can pass the floor to Uda, that is Uda Antonet, that is the Director General of OMEC, that can introduce our work today, and then we will proceed with the agenda we shared. So, Uda, please.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar titled The Energy, Technology and Trade Nexus in the Mediterranean, Implications for the Region and its relation with key global players. So today marks the launch of our new joint initiative with WEC Italy, the Mediterranean Energy Talks, meets a series of high-level webinars dedicated to exploring the strategic role of energy in the Mediterranean region. We have embarked on this initiative because we firmly believe that dialogue is essential for achieving a just energy transition in the Mediterranean. It is a cornerstone of inclusive, equitable, and sustainable change. And here are just a few reasons why. First, dialogue aligns diverse and sometimes divergent priorities. The Mediterranean region is a diverse and dynamic region encompassing a rich mosaic of countries, from affluent northern nations like Italy and France, because I'm in France and colleagues like Italy are in Italy, to developing economies in the south and east, from major energy exporters like Algeria and Egypt to energy importing nations across both shores. From rapidly growing population in the south, in particular, we have a projection of increase of the population by over 130 million people by 2050, as if we are going to add an additional Egypt to the South Mediterranean region, to declining population in the north. We expect a decrease of 13 million people by 2050 in the North Mediterranean countries, as if we remove equivalent of Tunisia from the north. So in such a complex landscapes and energy needs, economic capacities and policy priorities differ significantly. Inclusive dialogue is essential to bridge these differences and ensure that no one is left behind. Second, dialogue builds trust across borders. The region faces shared challenges: climate vulnerability, energy insecurity, and migration pressures. Cross-border cooperation is therefore crucial. Dialogue fosters trust and lays the groundwork for partnerships, whether in infrastructure development, technology transfer, or joint climate strategies. Importantly, we must encourage not just North-South dialogue, but also South-South dialogue and collaboration. Third, dialogue gives voice to all stakeholders. A just transition must be fair and inclusive. That means engaging youth, women, civil society, and all affected communities. Top-down decisions are no longer enough. Everyone must have a seat at the table to ensure policies reflect the lived realities and aspirations of all. Fourth, dialogue enables the exchange of knowledge and best practices. Learning from one another's successes and missteps can accelerate progress and reduce costs, both financial and social. Fifth, dialogue helps prevent conflicts and deepening inequalities. Without open communication, transitions risk exacerbating disparities, especially in fossil fuel-dependent regions. Dialogue helps anticipate disruption and design solutions like fair compensation, reskilling programs, and local economic alternatives. So this is the thinking behind the launching meet. As we convene today, we do set a pivotal moment where rapid technological change, shifting geopolitics, and the urgency of climate action compel us to rethink and reimagine our energy systems and regional cooperation. The Mediterranean is more than a sea. It's a bridge between continents, economies, and aspirations. Energy trade as the lifeblood of economic integration gives the Mediterranean a potentially transformative role as a hub connecting Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Realizing this vision requires commitment, modernizing infrastructure, strengthening cross-border partnerships, and navigating global market shifts with strategic foresight. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. We must decarbonize our economies with tailored, inclusive strategies. This is particularly urgent as the Mediterranean is warming 20% faster than the global average. Rising sea levels, water scarcity, and extreme heat are already threatening livelihoods and ecosystems. A shift to renewables like solar and wind can reduce emissions, enhance energy security, and create jobs. Clean energy drives innovation and long-term economic resilience, while improved air quality brings public health benefits, especially in our densely populated urban areas. Key sectors, such as transport and tourism, can be electrified and made more sustainable. Enhancing energy efficiency in buildings can cut costs and reduce consumption. But none of this can be achieved in isolation. Regional cooperation is vital for shared energy infrastructure and coordinated climate adaptation. We need strong policies, innovative financing, and active public engagement to drive the clean energy transition forward. We must also address the increasingly critical water, energy, food ecosystems, the Trade Nexus, which carries profound implications for energy and climate resilience in the region. Technological solutions exist, but again, dialogue and cooperation will be the key to the success. Today, we are joined by visionary experts. Together, we will explore how they unlock the Mediterranean full potential as a regional energy hub and how to build energy systems that support security, sustainability, and prosperity for generations to come. Let us approach this dialogue with open minds and a shared resolve. Let us work together toward a future where energy trade not only powers our economies, but also foster cooperation, peace, and inclusive development across the borders. Thank you again for joining us. I look forward to the inspiring conversation ahead, and I'm glad to give the floor to my friend Marco. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Huda. And indeed, it's a community of friends, a family that gathers around Mediterranean discussions since a number of years. I will not add much to what you have just said, if not to bring a perspective from afar. I am connecting from Washington, D.C. And when we started thinking to this series of talks, the word trade came spontaneously on the table. And I have to say, the word trade today has a completely different meaning than it had when we started having our conversations around energy trade in the Mediterranean, fostering trade, et cetera, et cetera. And I will flag three mega trends that I believe are underpinning on a more global scale the challenges and opportunities that Huda has highlighted for the Mediterranean. In legacy energy, oil and gas, and the trade of molecules, we now know that nobody is any longer an island. Especially in Europe, we thought for decades that our infrastructure system would insulate us from global shocks. Now, not only we know that this is no longer the case, but we also know that for many European countries, having the idea of being insulated was exactly the start of a severe issue on security and competitiveness. So now we are exposed to global markets. We are exposed to how global tensions, for example, on the logistics of oil, have impacted global trades. We are exposed to an enormous boom in LNG trades. So trade is the name of the game in the legacy sector. But if we go into the new sector as well, yellow is the new black. Electrons are what everybody talks about in the world and in the region. just take into the account the latest estimates of the International Energy Agency, of all agencies throughout the world. If we account for the computational demand, if the power demand, that computational capacities will require between here and 2030, we would account for the 10th largest power consumer in the world, added just in a matter of years. And obviously, this is a tremendous opportunity for the extended Mediterranean and Gulf region, which is abundant in energy, which is abundant in natural resources, but it requires stability and interconnection. And ultimately, Huda referred very well to the complexity, the no one-fits-all solutions of the energy transition in the Mediterranean, the energy transitions, as the World Energy Council call them, as we move ahead to our new World Energy Congress in Riyadh next year, very appropriately. Well, now we do realize that what we thought was to be a single transitioning process is actually multiple technology additions on the consumption and on the energy supply that we had in the past, and consumption patterns that we had in the past. And if we need to add technology, then trade again, market access, the standard setting, the way that countries cooperate on making these technologies available at scale will prove the determining factor in succeeding. So let's go into how we thought about this first seminar, rather, more than a discussion, enjoying the presence of three great thought leaders in the region. What is the key in the Mediterranean region to square the circle that Huda has framed? Well, there is opportunities in resources, there is opportunities in geographies, there is opportunities in the history of how this region is interconnected to all the key players around the discussion. And let me say that there is a big opportunity, a tremendous opportunity in the thought leadership that the region has been exercising in many areas. Let's just think of how the region played a pivotal role in COP27, 28, and also in COP29 to achieve a balanced way, a practical way, a pragmatic way forward on how the transitions should really be all-encompassing and reach an all-of-the-above approach. But for this to happen, we need cooperation and stability. And actually, if we just go and look into the name of the game of what is emerging, multilateral efforts, multilateral finance, stabilization, that many political currents are now adversaries of, but this stabilization proves to be a critical factor in the region. And this is why we couldn't be happier to have imagined this kickstarting of our meet process, of this energy talks process, focusing on the role of multilaterals and on the role of cooperation to mitigate investment risk, to enhance the possibility of investment, and to go forward. We have seen, and I'll rapidly pass the floor on to Farid Belhaj, who has been a leader on MENA, vice president at the World Bank on the MENA region. On this, we are exactly 1 week ahead of the spring meetings here in Washington, D.C. There is so much that the multilateral system is doing to adapt to the new challenges. The World Bank just reopened their approach to nuclear. There will be a lot of discussion on the lending strategies on infrastructure, for example, in Africa. So I think we couldn't have a better place to start. Farid, thank you so very much for being the first keynote in this series of events. I will leave the floor to you, and then we will continue with this discussion.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm extremely happy, honored to be with all of you. Many great specialists, people who really know this domain in much more depth than I would ever pretend to know. let me first start by formally thanking the Mediterranean Organization for Energy and Climate and the Italian Committee of the World Energy Council for this invitation. And I'd like also to acknowledge the importance of the Mediterranean Energy Talk series. Before getting into my keynote speech, just a couple of remarks to what you just mentioned, Marco. You mentioned the spring meetings, and that's true. In a week's time, the spring meetings will start. But let me just suggest that what's happening now around the world, the trade wars and how should I put it, the putting into question of the whole multilateralism system. I believe that these spring meetings will deal with many things, but I'm not sure that they will deal with energy. So this is one. Second, you mentioned the COP20, whatever, 7, 8, 9, now COP30. Unfortunately, and this will be the main thrust of my talk, nothing happened in COPs. We achieved 0 in COPs, and this is and unfortunately, actually, we need at some point to reckon with the reality of what's happening around the world and in international affairs, and that's why my speech today will take a very realist view of what's happening around the Mediterranean, notably on the energy sector. And that would hopefully complement what Paul, who is my colleague and friend, and with whom we did a lot of things on the energy sector in MENA, will come up with, because Paul has more of a cooperation idealist type of view of things. So we will complement each other, I guess. So let me start by saying that what you all know. So the Mediterranean is not merely a body of water; it is a frontier, a fault line. And I'm using frontier in order to really stress the point I'm making. Unfortunately, it is more a frontier today than what it should be. That is a point of reunion, unfortunately. It is a fault line where continents meet, where civilizations have risen and fallen, where trade routes have crossed for millennia. It is a space shaped as much by its contradictions as it is by its connections. And yet, for all of our shared history, the idea of a truly integrated Mediterranean remains more ambition than achievement. Despite decades of dialogue and institutional frameworks, the region remains fragmented economically, politically, strategically. And today, amid growing global instability, one force stands out, not as a miracle solution, but as a compelling catalyst. That force is that of energy. And let me be clear. I am not speaking of energy as a technocratic domain or a green utopia. I am speaking of energy as strategy, energy as leverage, energy as a force that, if harnessed through a realist lens, can bind states together, not through sentiment, but through necessity. And I would argue that energy is power, not just supply. In the Mediterranean, energy is not just about extraction or decarbonization targets. It is about sovereignty. It is about who controls the routes, the grids, who controls the flow. From the massive gas reserves of Egypt, Israel, and Cyprus, to the solar potential of Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia, to Europe's desperate search for alternatives to Russian gas, energy has become the new currency of influence in the region. The new currency of influence in the region. As Henry Kissinger, one of the main proponents of realism in international affairs, once warned, who controls energy can control nations. And in the Mediterranean, that control is now up for negotiations. But if we are honest, this region has not lived up to its potential. The pipes remain disconnected. The trust is fragile. And the institutions built to foster cooperation have too often delivered communiques rather than actual enforceable contracts. Why is that? Because we have allowed idealism to lead where realism should have guided. And I would suggest there is a fallacy of idealist integration. For too long, we have treated Mediterranean integration as a moral goal rather than a strategic projection. The Barcelona process, the new Union for the Mediterranean, countless summits, declaration, action plans, and yet the region remains disjointed. Realism teaches us that cooperation does not emerge because it is the right thing to do. It emerges because the cost of not cooperating becomes too high. That is where energy enters the picture, not as a soft bridge, but as a hard infrastructure, as leverage, as interdependence that aligns with the self-interest of all parties involved. And this is where we enter the age of mini-lateralism as an unfortunate but real substitute to multilateralism. And coming from someone who spent more than 30 years at the World Bank, this is painful, unfortunately, to reckon with. Minilateralism is gaining traction in a world where large-scale multilateral institutions are often seen as slow, gridlocked, or out of sync with global and current geopolitical realities. It reflects a realist response to global governance, focusing on what works rather than what's ideal. So we are witnessing the rise of a more pragmatic model, mini-lateralism, small interest-driven coalitions that are more effective than sweeping regional visions. Take the Egypt, Israel, Greece, Cyprus square. Countries with very different histories, even long-standing mistrust. But when natural gas, maritime borders, and European demand entered the picture, they found ways to align. Consider Algeria and Italy. Amid Europe's energy crisis, Rome turned south, not with slogans, but with contracts. It wasn't about ideology, it was about necessity. Even Morocco and Spain, with their old diplomatic tensions, now thankfully overcome, they have continued energy cooperations around hydrogen and solar development because energy does not wait for the perfect political alignment. In these examples, we see that realism does not reject integration. It demands that integration be grounded in interest, utility, and reciprocity. And of course, we cannot ignore the fractures that exist. The Eastern Mediterranean remains tense with competing maritime claims and proxy conflicts. Libya is still a broken state. The Maghreb is economically underconnected. Turkey and Greece, despite NATO membership, are still prone to frictions and not always in a mood for cooperation. Meanwhile, Europe's vision of decarbonization often clashes with North Africa's economic dependence on hydrocarbons. And this is an issue that I would love to hear you talk about actually during this conversation. This whole discussion about 2035 and how it will impact the countries of the southern rim of the Mediterranean. At the entrance of China and the reassertion of Russia are adding new geopolitical layers to an already crowded theater. So the truth is, the Mediterranean is too strategically important to be ignored, but too fragmented to act as one. This is why a realist lens is essential, not to be cynical, but to be clear-eyed. So what do we need? And where can we go from here? Let's abandon vague visions and instead build a realist roadmap, and that uses energy not as a talking point, but as a bargaining chip for the shared resilience. One, anchor energy partnerships in reciprocal interest. Any pipeline, any grid or terminal must serve both sides. We, with Paul and the whole team at the bank, we've worked a lot on putting together the ELMED project. We really hope that this is a two-way project. We really hope that this is not going to be Tunisia selling, solar power to Italy and with no reciprocal structural investment in the country. And that is not just the role of Italy. It is also for Tunisia to, kind of wake up and understand that this is an opportunity and this is a way for it to open up to the reality of private sector engagement in the energy production. Second point, treat infrastructure as diplomacy. Every megawatt of cross-border electricity, every cubic meter of gas is also a tool of foreign policy. And it is time we act like it. Third, respect sovereignty while enabling convergence. If Europe wants green energy from the south, it must stop dictating terms and start co-investing, co-owning, and co-strategizing. Institutionalize asymmetry. Let different countries move at different speeds. Integration is not a race. It is an ongoing and perennial negotiation. And fifth, create a Mediterranean energy bargaining forum, not another club, not another declaration, but a hard-nosed platform where states come to strike deals, defend interests, and define rules of engagement for the region's energy future. What we need most is to leverage the power of mutual necessity. At the heart of this vision is one simple idea. We do not need to be friends to cooperate. We just need to need each other. Because in this era of global fragmentation, the cost of Mediterranean disunity is growing. Climate shocks, migration pressures, supply disruptions, they do not respect borders and they will not wait for ideal solutions. There is no such a thing as Fortress Europe. There is no such a thing as Fortress Europe. We are all in it together. Energy may be our best shot at stitching together a region otherwise drifting apart, not because it is moral, but because it is strategic. And there in turn, let me turn to a voice that speaks for me to the deep history in the region. A great North African thinker, an idealist or realist at his time, Ibn Khaldun, who warned all of us that commerce is the engine of civilization, but that power governs its direction. Therein lie our task, to treat energy not as a silver bullet, but as a strategic engine, to use power not to dominate, but to direct cooperation and to shape a Mediterranean that does not dream of unity, but works toward calculated interdependence. And this, in my view, is the best segue to Paul's intervention and presentation. And thank you very much again, Huda and Marco, for this opportunity.
So thank you, Farid. And for the sake of time, I will not even try to summarize all the wealth that you've been putting on the table, but I'll simply thank you for highlighting how Italy has been, in recent time, really an active player in triggering the projects that have happened. So Italy has really contributed to, I don't know if it's half full part of the glass, but let's say that the part of the glass that is filling is also filling through Italy's contribution. So I think this is also a great segue into what Enrico will tell us in a second. But where you started on commerce and engines and power lies the key question of infrastructure, of investments, of how they are seen by communities as a core component of bettering lives, creating jobs, and really how they really managed to do what you so very eloquently sketched out in creating these bonds that are not just idealistic, but really stick together for strategic necessities. Paul, on to you. Paul Numba has been also with the World Bank regional director for infrastructure in the MENA region. So there is hardly anybody better place to take the baton from Farid on this conversation and guide us forward. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. Thank you, Marco, for the introduction, and thank you. I hope you're hearing me well. Very good. Excellent. So thank you very much. Let me also join Farid and extend my appreciation for the invitation, but more importantly, also my congratulations for really staging these talks, because I really believe it's a huge opportunity that you're giving to all of us to exchange views and also to exchange ideas so that we can take this important topic forward. We all know, as we speak, the world is racing towards decarbonization and energy security, and Farid introduction also touched on it. For us, we really see the Mediterranean space not as just a sea, but as a space that really can position itself to take advantage and become a global leader for clean energy trade. When I say clean energy, it's really about electrons, but also molecules, because we should not forget green hydrogen, which is important in the future. I've shared with you a short presentation. I don't know whether or not it can be uploaded, but if not, I can just go very quickly on it. The talk I'm going to give to you today, Pastor, is going to be really about taking it from where Farid left it and trying to show that there is a middle ground. We know that talking about trade today is very sensitive. I mean, referring to what's happening now on the discussion around trade is quite complicated, but still, I believe that the MENA region and Europe can build a very strong energy trade arrangement, but that trade arrangement should be different from the past trade arrangement that we have seen in the era of fossil fuel. My proposition in this presentation is to say that any trade arrangement that has to be developed on the energy side between Europe and the MENA region should really focus on the job creation and local content development on the Middle East, North Africa side. Then, as you know, any trade arrangement has to be a win-win arrangement. And if that's done, then we would be able to get that kind of win-win development. What's the rationale for trade to begin with? For me, if we go back to the basic foundation of Europe, Europe has decided, is strongly committed for becoming the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And this is part, as very clearly drafted, and it is binding since the adoption of the EU climate law that was approved by the Parliament in April 2021. And the targets are very clear for that transition to happen in the case of Europe. The renewable energy share in the energy mix in Europe should reach 42% by 2030, compared to 23% in 2022. Okay, so this is like doubling the share in renewable energy. Energy efficiency target is 11.7%, and the emission should be reduced by 55% compared to 1990 level. The constraint, we all know them. Europe today has very limited land available for this renewable energy project. So I was just saying that the constraint, we all know them. Europe may not have the land to build all these projects, so the land would be available somewhere else. We know that Europe also doesn't have enough good power solar radiation, and the permit approval process is pretty lengthy. But Europe has a key asset, is that Europe has the EU integrated national energy market, which are already in place and already working. And Europe has also given itself a set of tools, which are part of what Europe calls the EU Trans-Mediterranean Initiative to accelerate renewable energy deployment in clean energy and clean tech manufacturing. And there's a European Fund for Sustainable Development that has been established, which also include a lot of resources, including risk-sharing resources, which can help Europe to be able to de-risk a lot of projects in the southern bank of the Mediterranean. So for me, when I look at all of that, increasing interconnection between Europe and MENA region is a no-regret proposition. I mean, if you do it, you won't regret anything because you have the tools, you have the demand, you just need to deploy the corridors, which allows you to connect with the MENA region where there's plenty of cheap, abundant, cheap, clean energy through solar and wind. And this is well documented. You'll see in the presentation that, I mean, there's excellent condition for solar PV generation. There's a lot of excellent condition as well for wind resources. And I can also say there's a lot of land available, which allows some of these renewable energy projects to be done, generate the electricity which is clean that you need, and therefore will it to Europe. Now, this has been anticipated by market players. There's a lot of projects in terms of interconnection project to be built or being built between Europe and the Middle East, North Africa region. I mean, if you look at the presentation, you'll see that today there are only 3 interconnection links which are operational. There are 2 links between Morocco and Spain. And there's 1 link between Greece through Cyprus, and that goes to Israel. The rest of the interconnection links are either in feasibility kind of preparation, or for some of them in procurement stage, like the ELMED interconnection link that Ferid referred to earlier. And what does that mean? It means that these projects are going to be developed, but the problem would be, will there be electricity available to be wheeled over these links? That's the question we need to address. You can build ELMED, you can build all these interconnection links that are planned, but if the expansion of renewable energy deployment does not accelerate in the countries in the southern bank of the Mediterranean, then some of these links may sit idle or may not just be built. So this is one of the problems that we have to be fully aware of. And why do I say that? I say that because when you look at the challenges that the energy sector faces in most of the MENA countries, these challenges are really significant. One of the key challenges there is that the region still has high energy subsidies on fossil fuel. So if you're still using a lot of fossil fuel and you're still subsidizing them, this also reduces your ability to absorb more renewable energy. So unless you tackle that area, the ability of this country to do more renewable will be limited. The second area of limitation for these countries is that the utilities, which are likely to be the off-taker of some of these renewable energy projects, are most of them in financial distress, meaning that most of these utilities, because the tariffs usually are below cost, are losing money, therefore cannot be able to sign this PPA agreement with IPP on their own standing. So they would need a lot of guarantees, either by the government or by many other kind of players in the market. The third issue is the cost of transition itself. When at the World Bank, we did the country climate development report. We try to look at the path that these countries should take in order to reconcile their development needs and their climate obligation. And the costing that we came up with to illustrate the energy transition are pretty high. For Egypt, it will be about $200 billion that Egypt will have to mobilize to achieve net zero by 2050. For Morocco, it was going to be $130 billion by 2050. So these are significant numbers in countries where we know that the fiscal space is constrained. And we also know that mobilizing private sector is not always easy. And the last point, which is probably the most important point, is that although the region has abundant potential for renewable energy, the level of renewable energy development in the region today remains very low. If you take apart Morocco, which has achieved 42% of installed capacity based on renewable, the rest of the countries are below 20%. I mean, the leading countries in Morocco, and then you have Jordan following 26%. The rest of the countries are in between. So how do you get that supply of clean electricity in the pipes which are being built? So in order to address all these challenges, I thought that it's still possible to get things moving. And this is why I'm saying, if we want this agenda to take off, we need to bring forward the job dimension of clean energy transition. Today, we are assuming that jobs may be created, but we don't put job creation at the center. Why we should put job creation at the center? We are in a region in North Africa in particular where youth unemployment represents a big challenge for government. 30% of youth are unemployed. And Farid, he's sitting here, he used to quote a number. I mean, MENA would see 300 million young people coming to the job market by 2050. So if we want to solve a migration challenge that Europe is concerned about, we will need to change the way we look at energy and build around energy a proposition that can drive employment generation in sectors which can drive from the availability of cheap and competitive clean energy. And we try to do that at the World Bank ourselves. We try to see whether or not this is something that's possible. We did some study which showed to us that if you look only at the value chain of the energy sector, a country like Morocco could create, in the next 30 years, something like 700,000 net jobs. Egypt could create 2 million net jobs in the energy value chain if they were to achieve the target for renewable energy and energy efficiency. But we believe that more jobs could be created in other sectors of the economy. And this is where I believe the proposition we are making today becomes relevant, because these countries are very close to Europe. The global value chain crosses the Mediterranean. 50% of the global trade passes through the Suez Canal. So if you do reshoring and nearshoring, and you have cheap, clean energy in the Mediterranean, then you can use that as a proposition for redeveloping a huge marine manufacturing capability, which will allow to address not only the energy transition goal, but also to address the job creation goal, which is critical for government in the Southern Bank, but also the migration challenges that Europe is concerned about. And how can that be done? One is that the countries concerned themselves needs to put together a proposition in that direction. Second, I believe Europe has the tools to do that. And these tools have been framed as part of a Trans-Mediterranean Energy and Clean Tech Cooperation Initiative. I look at them, I saw everything that is needed there to do that, to support some of these projects. That money could go not only to support renewable energy, IPPs exporting to Europe, but should also go to clean tech manufacturing that is exporting to Europe and elsewhere, and also go to any other economic activity that's viable that could support job creation. This is the proposition I'm making to this roundtable, and I believe we could work around it and we can really deepen that understanding and build a dialogue around it. Let me stop there. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I think many of us could not emphasize more, amongst many of the things you put on the table, the emphasis on jobs and how, by the way, jobs need to be created within the energy sector and with the enabling component of secure and competitive energy supplies. And Italy obviously is a manufacturing economy, and we couldn't be more attentive to this dimension. So I think this is a great segue, Enrico, for you. It's a great bridge on the work that Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, where you had international institutional relations, is carrying out. Italy's GDP is truly is, and every time, like in 1 week time, every time you hit Washington, it's a clear proof of this. Is a phenomenal actor in many aspects related to the transition and to building a more sustainable economy and a more resilient economy overall. So Enrico, why don't I go to you when we close up in this first seminar by deep diving on an Italian perspective on how Italy, as other European players, can really leverage upon its instruments to foster cooperation, dialogue, and regional integration. Enrico, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marco. Thanks to you, to UDA, to OMEC, to Energy Council Italy for arranging these talks, these Med Energy talks. I'm very glad to be here with all of you. So thanks for having me. Indeed, I think both Farid and Paul said already the scene in a tremendous, comprehensive way. So let me just maybe add, as Marco just said, a few points on the Italian perspective and the possible contribution to these collective efforts to strengthen partnerships and cooperation between the two shores of the Med Sea, between Europe, MENA region, and Africa at large. Paul already mentioned key figures. Let me just, in order to be very also short, few key elements I want to start with. First of all, the relevance of the region, of the Med region, 10% of the global GDP, key hub for trade, for logistics, strategic projects in the ports and logistics sector, key strategic projects on the way ongoing in the region, has been mentioned by Farid, the Elmet project, which is one of the strategic interconnection projects between Tunisia and Europe, with strong involvement of World Bank, European Commission, but also Italian companies, starting with Turner from the CDP group. And all of this obviously needs to go hand in hand with an increasing need for capital, private capitals, to support energy transition, climate finance. You already mentioned this at large. The current overall mobilization on a global scale of climate finance reach almost $1.6 trillion in the last years. We are facing still a huge financing gap. We should reach 8-10 trillion dollars per year in terms of financial requirements to be filled in the coming years. So still a huge financing gap to fill, and this has been already mentioned. I think the key element which is not always so much highlighted, the debt constraint, the public debt with increasing on a global scale. Currently, on a global scale is about 92% of global GDP, with an issue in terms of fiscal space, not only for developing countries or for more fragile countries, but also it's I think very clear also for advanced economies in terms of available fiscal space. So all in all, putting all these elements together, I think there is an urgent need to really rely much more on private capital mobilization to fill the financial gaps to accompany energy transition and mobilize more resources for climate finance to complement public efforts. This is very relevant also in our region, in the Med region, in Europe, in the MENA region, in Africa. We see here our role as financial institutions, CDPs in Italian DFI, but this is relevant also for all the other development finance institutions, public development bank, multilateral development banks such as World Bank, such as African Development Bank, to really play this bridging role between public and private sector, trying to mobilize, create incentives for private capital to be mobilized, improving project bankability, play in a way a counter-cyclical role, and very much prioritize additionality, market complementarity, long-term view in our investment. We are not commercial banks. We do think it's key to support global goods and long-term goals in terms of energy transition. So this just to say that having in mind these needs, these gaps to fill, and this urgency, we are in Italy as CDP, as the Italian DFI, already mobilizing public and private money, the private money coming from postal savings. In the last 4 years, we mobilized as CDP 4 billion euros, invested for the 50% in Africa and very much also in the North Africa. Energy and sustainable infrastructure are the quite relevant portion of this funding. 43% of the total funding we mobilized in the last 4 years are about energy and supporting energy transition projects. And we already have a foot on the ground with the new offices that we open up in Egypt, in Morocco, and we are about to open a new CDP's offices in Kenya and Cote d'Ivoire. But on top of this, and I think it's relevant for the current discussion to mention quickly, the main flagship initiative Italy is putting forward, which has energy at its core, is the Mattei Plan for Africa, this long-term investment plan that Italy is putting forward, promoting on an equal footing long-term economic partnerships with African countries, and let me say all North African countries, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt are the target priority countries for this Mattei Plan for Africa. And CDP ourselves, we are basically the financial implementing partner of this long-term economic plan of investments. Key priorities: energy, again, energy access, sustainable infrastructure investments, and support also to local private sector. I echo very much what Paul said about job creation and how to use, really to leverage on energy transition investments to create job opportunities on the ground. Let me maybe recall a few key principles and a couple of tools we are utilizing for this plan, and then I conclude. Key principles. First of all, we do see the urgent need to do much more on the de-risking measures and incentives to allow private capital to step in much more compared to what has been done so far. Colleagues from World Bank, I think, know much better than me with the IFC the work, how much this is key, how private capital can really fill this gap that public funding cannot afford. Second point, we do think there is a certain amount of liquidity available on a global scale, but still there is a lack of good projects, what we call always bankable projects. So we do see need for public authorities to put their money on project preparation facilities much more. Also start working more on a division of labor between public and private sector. Public sector should provide really grants and support for project preparation facilities. Private sector should step in, obviously with the right set of incentives and risking measures to support long-term funding. And then we do think, and this is also the inspiration of the Mattei Plan for Africa, that we need to rely much more on stronger local ownership of our partners. So the funding, the investments are really to be channeled on the priorities in terms of energy transition that local authorities, local governments should design. For instance, we already support funding for in several countries in the region for policy loans to support local reform plans. These reform plans are not designed elsewhere in Europe or in the US, but really locally in the countries in which we are operating, for instance, to improve regulatory frameworks in the energy sector or other strategic initiative like this one. So local ownership, but also international partnerships. So we as CDP rely very much on co-financing and co-investing activities. So we want to definitely team up with our European and African partners, but also obviously with the international partners, starting with the World Bank. Next week we'll be in Washington DC with the spring meetings, and we are going to strengthen even more the cooperation between World Bank, Italy, and CDP. And last point, innovation in financing. We are also in this context very much supporting innovation also of the financial tools. For instance, we supported the issuance of the first green hybrid bond issued by BOAD, the Western African Development Bank, that issued this hybrid bond recently with the support of CDP and the Italian Climate Fund. So just to say that we are very much trying to have this guiding principle and criteria, involvement of private sector with the risking and incentive measures, support to project preparation facilities, local ownership, international partnerships, innovation in our finance tools. And last point, to do all of that, obviously we are mobilizing Italian money, European money with the European Commission, but also designing new financial tools with the partners from the region. And in this context, in the Mattei Plan for Africa context, we are just about to launch two specific new funds that we designed together with the African Development Bank, the so-called Mattei Plan fund targeting public sector in the region, with the first mobilization of money both from CDP and African Development Bank on an equal footing, and the second initiative, the so-called GRAF, Growth and Resilience Platform for Africa, targeting private sector with a target of 750 million euros of funding for this investment platform. And we are also supporting AJA, an initiative led by African Union and African Development Bank for green infrastructure. So a variety of tools and criteria to guide our activities. Very last point. On top of this funding and these financial tools, we are also very much advocating for dialogue and partnerships with our peers in the region, in the Med region in Africa. Let me mention just a couple of initiatives in the context of the G7 presidency last year of Italy. We launched two specific initiatives on energy and on the agri-food sector, with a very specific angle on energy transition, G7 Collaborative for Sustainable Food Systems, and energy for growth in Africa. We'll be next week in Washington, D.C. with a specific side event organized by the G7 presidency of Canada, but also by CDP and Italy to build on this work, specifically on long-term investments in Africa for infrastructure and for energy transition. So hope that colleagues within DC can join us. And last point, as coordinator of the Forum de Caisse de Dépôt, a network of development banks and financial institutions from Europe and Africa, we launched last year the Mediterranean Dialogue, a permanent framework for cooperation between Italy, France, Morocco, and Tunisia, and the related financing institutions, focusing also on climate adaptation and energy transition. So hope that we are going to have mid-May in Tunisia the new annual meeting of this fora. So very much looking forward to connect the dots and to see whether we can further work on opportunities for cooperation also with OMEC and World Energy Council Italy in this framework. But thanks so much for this opportunity. Looking forward to our discussion today and to the following ones in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Enrico. And well, first of all, looking forward to seeing you here in DC, and obviously for those who are connected who plan to attend the spring meetings and all what happens on the sidelines, we will be very happy to distribute the invitations that Enrico was mentioning. I will flag two things that you put on the table that are essential, I believe, to our way forward. First, from a methodology aspect, the role of concessional finance at large in creating new ways and new standards for engaging the private sector and triggering projects that are ultimately supported by the private sector. We have seen what has happened in, let's say, in a connected region in sub-Saharan Africa with the Lobito corridor. We've seen good work that has been carried out by the PGII, by the Partnership on Global Infrastructure and Investment, and around the European Global Gateway. But we definitely need, I think, financial institutions' guidance on creating a new geometry for projects to really have an impact and be sustainable economically over time. The second aspect that you mentioned is Africa. We clearly do not live anymore in an island. Nobody does. Definitely the Mediterranean does not. You mentioned Morocco, how Morocco is being central in infrastructural projects to debottleneck West African energy resources, for example, and in creating an Atlantic community that goes, let's say, beyond the specific region, or obviously the link between North Africa and the Middle East. And this leads me to the fact that we will definitely take you up on continuing to engage with you and having you on board as we move on this dialogue in the future. And I would say target date and place is 2026, the Riyadh World Energy Congress, which I think will be a phenomenal platform to really achieve breakthroughs in this regional energy conversation, but there will be more soon. So we are just 5 minutes beyond the 60 minutes that we had allocated for this first seminar. I couldn't be more grateful to Farid, Paul, and Enrico for gracing the launch of these dialogues. Maybe Huda, back to you for a last word, and we will be publishing this soon on our website, and look forward to the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it was indeed a very rich kickoff of this initiative, and all what we've been hearing from our distinguished speakers is encouraging in terms of continuing this initiative. So apologies for not having more time. Maybe we should plan for 1 hour and 30 minutes next edition, so that we can have a dialogue session also with the participants and a Q&A session. So I apologize for this, but we definitely have many recommendations and messages that we had heard from our distinguished speakers again in order to build a more inclusive, sustainable future in this fragmented but still strategic Mediterranean region. So definitely we will be preparing a summary, and we very much look forward continuing the dialogue with our three speakers for the next edition, and we hope that we can keep in touch with you so that we can see also how we are developing and how we are implementing the different recommendations that you gave us, and for which I personally, we as OMEC, fully subscribe, because our full-time job is how to promote cooperation between energy companies, but also between energy countries in order to have a better future in our region. So I can only say thank you so much, and so keep in touch, and we will come back to you soon with the next data and topic. And again, thank you to our speakers, and we hope that we will keep in touch and more get in touch with you to discuss also for the next editions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And a very last word of gratitude for the teams, and in particular, I will flag Paolo Storti, who has put us together technically, and will shut down the meeting at some point. So
and Matteo for bringing all these speakers together. Thank you.
Paolo.
Thank you very much. Also from my side, it was a very interesting meeting, and I can have to say well participated. So a lot of friends, and just to remark what Marco and Uda said, we will publish on our website all the findings from these debates, and we will inform you about the next steps. So thank you again, and thank you, Matteo, also from my side, and Marco and Uda to guiding us into this interesting debate.
Thank you to all. Bye-bye. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you to all.
Bye.
Bye, Paul. Bye, Farid. Bye, Enrico.
Bye. Bye.